The dining room had gone completely silent, and in my experience, silence is louder than anything. I'd stood on the deck of a destroyer during a drill that could have gone very wrong. I'd sat across from commanding officers who could end a career with one sentence. None of that prepared me for the quiet that filled my mother-in-law's dining room that Sunday afternoon, with a pot roast going cold in the middle of the table, and every single person I loved refusing to look at me. My son-in-law Josh had stopped mid-sentence. My granddaughter, Lily, sat with her fork still in the air. Matthew, my husband of 31 years, sat 2 chairs down from me with his jaw tight and his eyes on the tablecloth, like he'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head and never once figured out how to stop it from happening. Frances sat at the head of the table. Of course she did. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me for 3 months now, like a woman waiting for the room to agree with her, because it always had. "The Navy may have taught you how to follow orders, Caroline," she said, calm as anything, "but this family already has someone in command." Nobody breathed. I looked around that table, at Matthew, who couldn't meet my eyes, at family members who'd known me for 3 decades and still weren't sure whose side to be on, and I understood, in that 1 second, that nothing after this moment would ever be the same again. I opened my mouth to answer her. "Before I tell you what I said, you should know how a retired Navy senior chief, who spent 22 years keeping her composure under actual fire, ended up fighting for her place at her own family's dinner table. Because it didn't start with an insult. It never does. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. This channel is for anyone who's ever loved a family enough to stay patient with it, and who understands that patience has a limit. If stories about real families, real justice, and real people finally standing up for themselves speak to you, go ahead and hit subscribe. Drop a like if you're the kind of person who roots for the underdog, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read everyone. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Because every family reaches a moment when silence stops being enough, and mine started on the happiest morning of my life. 11 months earlier, I woke up in Norfolk, Virginia, and I didn't have anywhere to be. I want you to understand what that meant to me. 22 years in the Navy, deployments that ate birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas mornings, I only heard about secondhand. I used to lie in a rack the size of a coffin and think about the dumbest things: folding laundry with the windows open, grocery shopping without a countdown clock in my head, waking up next to Matthew on a Tuesday for no reason at all. That morning, I got to do all 3. Matthew made coffee too strong, same as always, and we sat on our back porch in our pajamas until nearly 10 o'clock. He kept reaching over and squeezing my hand like he needed to check I was really there. "Feels different," he said. "Good different." "I've been dreaming about this exact porch for 6 years, I told him, and I meant it. Not a promotion, not a medal. A porch, and a Tuesday, and a man who still looked at me like the day we met. For the first few weeks, that's exactly what retirement gave us. We repainted the mailbox together. We picked out new towels, an argument over teal versus navy that ended in both of us laughing on the bathroom floor. Small, unremarkable, wonderful things. I kept waiting for the adjustment to feel hard. Instead, it felt like finally exhaling. Frances came around that first week with a casserole and a smile that had welcomed me into this family since Matthew and I were 26 years old. She'd never had an easy road. She raised Matthew and his sister mostly alone after his father passed, and somewhere in those years she became the person everyone called first. Doctor's appointments, holiday plans, family arguments, Frances handled it. For a long time I respected that about her. I still do if I'm honest. "You'll want to get that guest bathroom regrouted before winter," she told me, setting the casserole down like she lived there. "I already called Ronnie. He does good work and he owes me a favor." I remember smiling and saying thank you. It seemed thoughtful. It seemed, at the time, like nothing at all. That became the pattern, though I didn't see it as a pattern yet. Frances mentioned she'd already spoken to the insurance agent about switching our homeowner's policy to the family's longtime provider. Frances let me know she'd already told her book club I'd be joining, because a woman needs friends her own age, not just the Navy wives. Frances rearranged our pantry one afternoon while I was at a doctor's appointment, so it makes more sense. Every time, I told myself the same thing. She means well. She's been running point on this family for 30 years. Old habits don't disappear just because I'm home now. Matthew never saw a problem because to him there wasn't one. When I gently mentioned that Frances had scheduled the grout guy without asking, he just laughed and said, "That's just Mom. She likes being useful." He wasn't wrong. But somewhere underneath his easy laugh, I started noticing he never once said, "That's not really her call to make." I told myself I was being too sensitive. 22 years of command experience and I still second-guessed my own red honor room, because this wasn't a ship, this was a family, and I desperately wanted it to work. 3 weeks in, Matthew and I sat down one night with a legal pad and talked about redoing the living room. Our first real project as two people building an actual life together, instead of a marriage conducted over spotty satellite calls. We picked a soft sage color for the walls. We talked about a sectional, something big enough for grandkids to pile onto during the holidays. It was such a small conversation, it felt enormous to me. 2 days later, I came home from the farmer's market to find a delivery confirmation email open on our shared computer. A sectional. Charcoal gray, not sage green. Already ordered. Already scheduled. I called Matthew at work, my voice steadier than I felt. "Did you order furniture?" "Mom did," he said. Like that answered the question instead of raising 40 more. She found a deal through her friend at the furniture outlet. Figured she'd surprise us, take one thing off our plate. We hadn't decided on gray. "Care, it's a couch." A pause. She was just trying to help. "Don't make this bigger than it is." I stood in my own kitchen, in the house I had waited 22 years to finally live in like it was mine, holding a phone with an email confirmation still glowing on the screen, and I understood something that had nothing to do with furniture. This had never been a series of small favors. While I was gone, years of me gone, deployment after deployment, a whole structure had quietly built itself around my absence, a structure with a chain of command, and I wasn't in it. I wasn't being welcomed home into a life Matthew and I would build together. I was being handed a seat in a life that had already been finished without me. And the man I loved, the man I'd married before either of us knew what 22 years apart would cost us, hadn't even noticed the door had already closed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stood there, very quietly, and started understanding exactly how far this had gone, and exactly how long it had been going on without my permission. I didn't say anything else about the couch. That was my decision, and I want to be honest about why I made it. Not because I'd stopped caring. Because I still believed, that week, that patience was a strategy and not a surrender. 22 years of service teaches you that you don't win every fight in the moment it presents itself. Sometimes you hold your position and wait for better ground. So when the charcoal gray sectional arrived, I helped Matthew carry it in. I even laughed when it barely fit through the doorway. "See?" he said, wiping his forehead. "Not so bad. It's a nice couch, Matthew." He heard agreement. I meant something closer to, "I'm choosing not to fight about furniture." That gap between what I said and what I meant became the whole shape of that month. I told myself things would settle once Frances saw I wasn't trying to shut her out of our lives. I invited her to lunch. I asked her opinion on paint samples I'd already picked, just so she'd feel included in a decision that was, technically, already made. I was managing her. I understood that even as I did it. I just didn't yet understand what it was costing me. 3 weeks later, my niece Paige got engaged, and her mother, Matthew's sister Denise, asked if we'd host the engagement dinner. Our backyard, our house. I said yes before I even looked at Matthew, because for the first time since retiring, someone had asked me. I spent 4 days planning it. I picked the menu. I ordered string lights for the patio. I called the rental company about tables. Frances found out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she'd already spoken to the caterer directly. cutting the menu I'd chosen down to what people actually eat at these things, and told Denise the dinner would start at 5 instead of 7, because sunset photos matter more than cocktail hour. Nobody had asked me. Nobody had needed to. She just wanted to help you, Matthew said when I brought it up. You had a lot on your plate. I had exactly the right amount on my plate, Matthew. It was my event to plan. Nobody said it wasn't yours. Then why does it feel like it isn't? He didn't have an answer for that. He had a version of an answer. Something about how his mother had hosted every Mercer family gathering for 30 years and didn't know how to sit one out. But that wasn't an answer to my question. It was an explanation for hers. The night of the party, I stood at my own patio doors holding a serving spoon I didn't need for a menu I hadn't chosen, and Denise came up beside me with a glass of wine and a look I couldn't quite place. "You doing okay?" she asked. "Francis mentioned you've had kind of a rough transition, being back full-time and everything." I turned to look at her. She said that, just that it's a big adjustment. Going from giving orders to… Denise caught herself, smiled like she hadn't meant to finish that sentence. You know, regular life. I stood there holding a spoon, smiling at my own niece's engagement party, while a story about me that I had never told anyone moved through my family like it was simply true. That was the moment I understood the conflict had left our house. It wasn't just happening between me and Francis anymore. It was happening about me, in rooms I wasn't in conversations I never got invited to defend myself in. I didn't correct Denise. What would I have even said? No, actually, I'm fine. Your grandmother-in-law just quietly runs my marriage, and I'm the only one who's noticed. I smiled, said I was doing great, and went back to serving food I hadn't picked at a party that had my name on the invitation and someone else's decisions in every detail. I finally said something to Matthew that night after everyone left, while we stood in the kitchen surrounded by rental chafing dishes. Your mother told Denise I'm struggling to adjust. I'm sure she didn't mean it like, I didn't care how she meant it, Matthew. I care that it's what people believe about me now. He set down the dish towel. For once, he actually looked tired instead of patient. What do you want me to do? Call my mother and tell her to stop talking about you. I want you to tell her the truth. That I'm not adjusting badly. I'm watching her make decisions that aren't hers to make. And nobody in this family seems to notice but me. Maybe, he said, quiet. If you didn't treat every offer to help like an inspection, people wouldn't have to explain you so much. I felt that land somewhere behind my ribs. Explain you, like I was a report that needed footnotes. Like the woman who'd raised his children through deployments, who'd missed birthdays defending a country that would never know her name, had somehow become a situation requiring management. You sound like her, I said quietly. That's not fair. No, I said. It isn't. I went to bed before he did that night. For the first time in our marriage, I locked the bedroom door, not out of anger, but because I needed one small room in that house that nobody could rearrange without my permission. I stopped waiting for the pattern to break on its own after that. I stopped expecting Francis's next kind gesture to feel different than the last 12. I stopped hoping Matthew's next conversation with his mother would finally include the sentence, "That's not your call." Somewhere in the space of that one exchange in the kitchen, I understood that hope wasn't a strategy either. It was just delay with better manners. A few days later, digging through a kitchen drawer for tape, I found an old shared calendar page from years back. Christmas Eve, filled in months in advance, in Francis's handwriting, not mine, not Matthew's. My name wasn't on it anywhere. I told myself one page didn't prove anything. I put it in my folder anyway, and I couldn't have told you why. The following weekend, alone in the house while Matthew golfed with his brother-in-law, I sat down to do something practical. Something that had nothing to do with anyone but me. I'd promised myself I'd get my discharge paperwork organized. Separation orders, benefits forms, 22 years of records I'd been living out of a duffel bag for most of my adult life. I pulled out the old accordion folder I'd carried through 4 duty stations. Habit, more than anything, made me keep everything. Every card. Every printed email. Every note Matthew had mailed me during deployments, every family calendar I'd saved because it was the closest thing I had to being present. Sailors learn to document. You write down what happened because memory fails, and paperwork doesn't. I wasn't looking for anything when I found it. But once I started laying things out on the dining table, cards, emails, old shared calendars, texts I'd printed just to have something physical from home, I saw dates. And once I saw dates, I saw a rhythm I hadn't let myself see before. The down payment on this house, 11 years ago, that Francis had helped arrange while I was at sea, decided, not offered. The nursery pink color for our daughter, chosen and painted before I ever got a vote, while I was 6,000 miles away, and Matthew wrote Mom thought it'd be a nice surprise. The private school decision for our son. The choice of pediatrician. The Christmas Eve tradition moved permanently to Francis's house the year I was deployed and never moved back. One decision at a time, none of it looked like anything. Laid end to end across 11 years, it looked like exactly what it was, a pattern. Deliberate, consistent, and never once run through me. Because I hadn't been in the room to stop it, and by the time I came home for good, nobody remembered that stopping it had ever been an option. I sat at that table for a long time, staring at 11 years of my own absence being quietly filled in by someone else's decisions, wearing my husband's handwriting like a signature. I wasn't imagining any of it, and for the first time since I retired, I wasn't just hurt. I was ready. I didn't confront anyone the morning after I found those papers. I made coffee. I fed the dog. I sat at the same dining table where I'd laid out 11 years of my own absence the night before, and I let myself feel exactly what I felt. Not anger, not yet. Something steadier than that. Clarity has a different weight than anger. Anger wants to move fast. Clarity is patient enough to wait for the right room. That evening, I asked Matthew to sit down with me. No ultimatum in my voice. No folder slammed on the table like a courtroom drama. I want to show you something, I said. Not to fight. I need you to actually look. I laid it out the way I'd laid out ship's logs for 2 decades. Dates on the left, decisions on the right, no editorializing. The down payment, the nursery, our son's school, Christmas Eve, the sectional, Paige's engagement dinner. Matthew went quiet in a way I hadn't heard from him before. Not defensive quiet. Recognizing quiet. I wrote some of these, he said, tapping an old email. His own handwriting, decades younger. Mom thought it'd be a nice surprise. You did. I didn't think I was choosing her over you. I thought I was just. He stopped. Keeping the peace, I said. Yeah, Matthew, peace that only one person has to keep quiet for isn't peace. It's just quiet. He didn't argue with me. That was new too. I watched something shift in him over the next 2 weeks, and it wasn't the kind of change you'd put in a movie. Matthew didn't become a different man overnight. He became a man who started noticing his own reflexes before acting on them. The test came fast, the way it always does. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks out, and Matthew and I had already decided, together at our own kitchen table, that we'd host it this year. Our house. Our table. The first Thanksgiving of my retirement, and I wanted it to actually feel like mine. Frances called on a Sunday to say she'd already ordered the turkey from her butcher and would just bring everything over Thursday morning like always. I watched Matthew's face while he held the phone. Mom, he said, Caroline and I are hosting this year. We've got it handled. Silence on the other end. I could hear it even from across the kitchen. I'm not trying to take over, sweetheart. I just didn't want you two worrying about the turkey on top of everything else. We're not worried about the turkey, Matthew said. We want to do this ourselves. It was such a small sentence. It cost him more than either of us said out loud. Frances didn't take it well, though she wouldn't have called it that. She called it concern. She mentioned to Denise that she hoped Caroline wasn't pushing Matthew into cutting her out. She brought up, more than once, how much simpler things used to be. She wasn't lying when she said these things. That was the hardest part to watch. She believed every word. By the time the family gathered for Sunday dinner 2 weeks later, the whole family could feel something had changed, even if nobody could name it yet. The dining room was full. Denise, Paige, our son Ryan and his wife, our daughter Emily and her husband Josh, and our granddaughter Lily, working on a dinner roll like it owed her money. Frances sat at the head of the table, same as always, and started talking about Thanksgiving again before anyone had even finished serving. "I still think it makes more sense at my place," she said. "More room. And honestly, Caroline, you've never hosted a big holiday before. No shame in that. It's a lot to take on." The table went quiet the way it does when everyone's senses are current under the water. I set my fork down. "Frances, I hosted change of command ceremonies for 200 sailors and their families. I think I can manage a turkey." A small laugh from Josh. Frances didn't smile. "That's different," she said. "This is family." "It is," I said. "This is family." Which is exactly why it should be up to the people whose family it is. I wasn't loud. I never raised my voice once, not that whole dinner. I need you to know that. I just kept going, calm as I'd ever been in my life, and I laid it out the same way I'd laid it out for Matthew at our kitchen table. The down payment, the nursery, Christmas Eve, not as accusations, as dates, as a pattern that had quietly decided over 11 years that my voice was optional in my own life. Frances's face changed while I talked. Not shame, disbelief first, then something harder. "I have spent 30 years holding this family together," she said, and her voice had an edge now I hadn't heard directed at me before. "The Navy may have taught you how to follow orders, Caroline, but this family already has someone in command." There it was. The room went silent, exactly the way I'd seen it happen before I'd even understood why. Lily's fork stopped in the air. Matthew's jaw went tight. I looked around that table at every person who had, in one way or another, learned to live inside Frances's version of our family, without ever being asked if they agreed to it. Then I looked back at Frances and I answered her. "The Navy taught me how to follow orders, Frances," I said quietly. "But this family already has someone in command." I let it sit there a second before I finished. "She just finally decided to command her own life instead of asking your permission for it. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody needed to." Matthew set down his glass. "Mom, she's right. I let this happen. Every time I picked the easy conversation over the honest one, I was choosing you over my own marriage, and I didn't even see it happening. That's on me, not just you." Frances looked at her son like the floor had genuinely moved under her chair. I was only trying to help. "I know you believe that," I said, and I meant it, every word. "But help that doesn't ask permission isn't help, Frances. It's just control with better intentions." She didn't have an answer for that. For the first time in 3 months, neither did the silence work in her favor. Thanksgiving happened at our house that year. Frances came. She sat at our table in a chair I picked, at a time I set, eating a menu I planned, and she didn't try to change a single thing about it. She was quieter than usual. Quieter, I think, than she'd been in 30 years. It wasn't punishment. That much I need you to know, because I never wanted to win by taking something from her. I wanted my own life back, not her unhappiness. Somewhere over the following months, she started asking instead of announcing. Small things, at first. It's still small things, mostly. But she asks now. And when Matthew and I make a decision about our own house, our own holidays, our own marriage, nobody has to explain it to anybody afterward. Matthew and I painted the guest room sage green last spring. Just the two of us, one Saturday, bad music playing, more paint on the floor than the walls. He asked me first this time. About everything. I spent 22 years learning that real command isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about staying steady when everyone expects you to fold. I didn't reclaim my family by fighting harder than Frances. I reclaimed it by refusing to disappear quietly, one small decision at a time, until the truth simply couldn't be ignored anymore. That's where I'll leave you, at my own table. Finally, with a family that asks instead of announces. Thank you for staying with Caroline's story all the way to the end. If it hit close to home, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And I want to hear from you. At what point do you think Frances stopped helping her family and started trying to control it? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one.